Hi, my name's Will, and I'm the Campaigns and Communications Officer at Results UK. And welcome to this call on global learning. Today, I'm here with Professor Douglas Bourn, Professor of Development Education and Director of Development Education Research Centre at the Institute of Education, University College London. Doug has written a blog for Results UK titled Global Learning, Rethinking Our Approach to Education on Development and Global Issues. And it is fantastic to have this opportunity to discuss the points raised in that piece. Results UK is a political advocacy organisation that speaks up for strong government action on global poverty eradication. This includes healthcare, education, and nutrition. This year, Results UK is celebrating its 40th anniversary, and as a way to mark that, as well as reflecting on the progress made in global development over the last 4 decades, we are looking at new ideas of how we can improve development advocacy and better tell the story of development in years to come. To read Doug's blog, you can either visit the results website or click on the link in the description below. Doug, welcome. To kick us off, can you introduce yourself and provide a quick rundown of your experience in development education?
Thanks, Will. I'm very pleased to be with everyone today. So I've been working in this field of development education since the early 90s, I suppose. In 1993, I set up an NGO called the Development Education Association, which was our sort of umbrella body for promoting learning on global and development issues, which eventually changed its name to Think Global in 2008. From my work in running that association, I became increasingly interested in the impact of learning about global and development issues. And that led me into dialogue with what was then the Department for International Development, who agreed to support funding of a new research centre covering the field of development education and related areas. And I was appointed to lead that centre in 2006, based at the Institute of Education, which was then part of the University of London and which is now part of University College London. And since that time, since I set up the centre, we've engaged in a whole range of national and international initiatives to promote learning about global and international development issues. Possibly one of our main things is we established an international network called the Academic Network of Global Education Learning, ANGEL. And I've recently passed on most of the leadership of the centre to my colleague, Dr. Francis Hunt. So much of my work has been in recent years is to promote learning about global and development issues, promoting terms such as global citizenship and education with sustainable development. And I've led the development of a master's program in this field and supervised over 20 doctoral students who produced research related to these areas and either written or edited about a dozen books covering this field.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So as mentioned, in your piece, you kind of talk about global learning, and I was wondering if you could explain kind of in general what global learning means and why it's important. And then I guess what tools it can give students that they're currently not being equipped with.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Will. So global learning as a term sort of emerged in the early 2000s, really, as the sort of term development education seems a bit old-fashioned, a bit of out of date, and not recognizing the context of globalization. So global learning is coming to mean a promotion of not just learning about the wider world, but to have a global outlook, to believe in social justice, to encourage participatory approaches to learning, and to work towards a more just and stable world. And there's obviously an action element to that. So it's really become seen as the term to frame the practice and the policy development in this field since the early 2000s. And the main vehicle of that was from 2012 to 2018, a major UK government funded program called the Global Learning Programme, which engaged about 10,000 schools throughout the UK. So global learning is seen as an umbrella term to promote learning about these issues and as a way of encouraging teachers and educators in whatever field of education learning to look about to what extent are they bringing some of these questions into their teaching and their practice. Are they asking questions about, are we looking at this in a global sense? Are we looking at things from a range of voices and perspectives? And to what extent are we bringing in a social justice approach, that we are talking about caring about the wider world? And also, are we equipping learners of whatever age to work towards a more just and sustainable world?
Fantastic. Thank you. Uh, on that of kind of it being brought into the classroom, I guess, and maybe this is more about a younger age. Can you provide some examples of where global learning approaches could be or have been adopted in the classroom?
Yes. So in the UK, there's a quite a strong tradition led by civil society organisations about promoting learning about global development issues, often through resource packs or training programs, or in more recent years, what's been called award programs, where schools encourage to look at particular themes and from which the school gets an award. And probably the most well known of this is one developed by UNICEF called the Rights Respecting School Award Program, which has engaged several thousand schools throughout the UK, which are promoting children's rights. There's another one on fair trade, which led by the Fair Trade Foundation. And there's also one on environment education. But alongside that, a lot of it is around how we can promote like a global citizenship ethos, or look more globally throughout the school, whether it's a primary school or secondary school, whatever nature of the institution. So that's very much that sort of ethos and values base. And then obviously you get particular themes that you might want to look at in more depth, which are very strong emphasis on content, which might be around climate change, it might be around the Sustainable Development Goals, or it might around a particular country or focus on particular areas. And then the third area would be obviously the sense of skills. So, to what extent are you developing critical thinking skills to look at things from a variety of perspectives and to encourage people, young people, in their own lives, to what can they do to make a better world?
Fantastic. Um, I wanted to talk about your piece and your blog and how in which you comment about kind of how we tell the story when making the case for international development cooperation. So in the blog, you write, clearly there is an assumption by the UK government that the public are not interested in international development. However, public concerns around migration and asylum seekers are global issues and can only be understood by engaging with debates around the impact of movements of people around the world, the impact of wars and conflicts, and the continual need for people to escape oppression. Can you expand on this a bit further? Both the kind of interconnectivity and the failure to connect these two issues in development communications.
Yes, and I think there's the sense in which the narrative framing of international development has become much broader than just talking about combating global poverty, or whilst important though that is, that obviously it's now about how poverty and inequality connects to and is underpinning a lot of the big global challenges of today, which are around migration, which are around climate change, and the sense of the movements of people. And so, to me, that one of the important roles we play as educationists and people working in the civil society organizations, how can we ensure that the questions around asylum seekers and migration are seen as part of changing global patterns and not just something that's happened in relation to the UK, it's happening throughout the world. And the causes of that relate to increased inequalities. They also relate to the impact of climate change and also the impact of wars and conflicts around the world. So it's about understanding that a lot of these things are connected and it's not just about taking them in isolation. And I think there's a danger that we, in societies, you, people move to much more quicker, simple soundbite solutions, whereas actually a lot of these questions are very complex and require some depth of understanding and engagement, and there aren't easy solutions. So that's where the importance of global learning and education in general comes in.
Mhm. And I think in kind of corollary to this, you talk about reframing development from a charity perception to one of social
Yeah.
justice. Um, and can you explain, I mean, you've kind of touched on this before, but how this can be done in both kind of everyday conversations about aid in the classroom?
Yeah, so I suppose historically that a lot of the discussions around aid and development came from a very charitable, paternalistic perspective. One could think of going back 30, 40 years ago to Live Aid, for example, and a lot of the images came out of starving babies, of helping the poor. Um, and a lot of the practice of development education, global learning, has been around challenging that assumption that it's about mutual learning, it's about partnerships, it's about working together, and it's not about helping helpless victims. It's about understanding people in their own context and ensuring that they have a voice in securing social change. And there's been some progress on that, I think, in a number of fields in education in this country and other countries around the world, but it still reappears now and again. And whilst a lot of NGOs have made progress on this, there's still a danger that when you see some of the media images come out from some of the leading charities of the dominant image of one of people in starving poverty and helpless victims, whereas the majority of that's not the case, and there's not an image I would suggest which should be promoting, and it's moving away from that and working in partnership with. So there's been a lot of initiatives in this country over the last 20, 30 years about encouraging partnerships between schools and young people in the UK and with the global south to what we can do together and how they can learn from each other. So it's having a different frame of reference for the nature of that form of engagement. It's not a one-way relationship, it's a two-way relationship.
Hmm. Absolutely. Thank you very much. And finally, you've spoken about their progress. So, has there been a shift towards global learning? And where is global citizenship being taught well? And what would you say to any educators who wanted to incorporate global learning in the classroom?
Yes, thank you for that. To be honest, it's quite difficult to assess the extent to which that's covered today because there's the situation in the UK today is less positive in terms of political support and educational support. So that it's quite difficult to get a sense of what the overview is. It's quite challenging to get to find the evidence, right? But historically, one can see a shift from learning about global and development issues to be on the margins, to be more central to the life of a school. It's on the curriculum in a number of subjects in all the four jurisdictions in the UK. I would say possibly within the four jurisdictions in the UK, some of the most effective global learning in this field is in Scotland because there's been consistent funding in this area. And if you go over to Ireland, there's a lot of activity in Ireland in this area. So you get some elements of that. And I think whilst there has been a decline in engagement from some of the leading international development organizations because of lack of funding, to be honest, if you go into school, primary school, and a lot, particularly primary schools, but also quite a lot of secondary schools, you see elements of these things happening because teachers and educators know that learners of all ages need to be equipped to living in a globalized world. I several years ago I read a book called about global skills and the sense in which young people need to be brought up to have the skills to engage in globalized world, to understand the different issues and effects, and that people are going to be much more socially and economically mobile than they were, say, 20, 30 years ago. So there's quite a lot of recognition of that. But on the other hand, in the UK, in recent years, there's been the rise of more extreme forms of nationalism and far right ideologies. And that's leading to some real challenges for a lot of educators and teachers who are recognizing these things and see that they possibly have an increased priority to promote a global outlook as a way of combating these challenges. Because to me, that the frame of reference now for promoting global learning in many ways is much more, almost more political, more ideological, because of the impact of far right populism in the UK and Europe and in North America. So the sense in which when you're promoting of being global citizens becomes a much more not much challenging, but important debate, and which may not always be that easy or straightforward. But therefore, you get examples where teachers sometimes feel reluctant to address these issues because of what's happening in their local area, because of the rise of far-right nationalism or racism. Um, but on the other hand, you also get other teachers, other schools who say, yes, this is even more important, or we should do it. So that's where the importance of NGOs and other bodies to support schools and teachers to address this. And bodies like UNICEF and some of the others that I've mentioned, like there's a lot of local development education centres around the UK who do some really excellent work. And I work quite closely with a centre in London called Global Learning London that's done a lot of work around anti-racism and promoting a more just and equal world. And I think that's where this field is now. It's broadened its emphasis from just learning about what could traditionally seen as a development issue to much more questions of social justice, dealing with inequality, and promoting a more positive vision of the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights on global education. Once again, if anyone watching wants to read your blog or is interested in knowing more about the case for global learning, you can find all the links in the description below. Thanks to everyone who's been watching, and do subscribe to the Results channel as we continue this series of conversations throughout the year.